Morning, Lakeview, or afternoon, whenever you're watching this video. Hope you're doing well. Excited to continue our series on spiritual disciplines in this season of Lent. This week, we will be looking at the discipline and practice of Sabbath. And I don't know about you, but this is one that's been fairly elusive. I think most of the times I talked about this as a kid, the argument was against observing a traditional Sabbath or because that was kind of under the old law or that was what Jewish people did. It's not something that we did, particularly in the Protestant evangelical space. A lot of arguments on, well, what day is it? If it's literal, then it would be Saturday, but people would say it's on Sunday. A lot of times it was bent toward legalism. And I remember hearing stories, of people, not doing anything on Sundays, refraining from uh, everything under the sun, even not going to restaurants because then you were making somebody work. So Sabbath probably brings up a whole lot of things and emotions for a lot of people, myself included. And I think that's interesting. And part of what I think is interesting about that is I want us to sit with the uncomfortable and recognize what's below the surface. And for me, I'll hopefully you'll hear me tell some stories of myself and my own journey with understanding Sabbath, with experiencing and observing Sabbath in my own life. What I recognized is my defensiveness or my unease, dis-ease, pushback against Sabbath really was because of my pushback against the counterculture nature of Sabbath, of rest, of stopping. And what that says to us in terms of our engagement and culture and our drive for more and always going. And you've heard me talk about my story of consistently being on the go, doing things, going from one thing to the next, and being a workaholic, particularly in ministry in the church, doing a lot of good things, but was running at a pace that did not allow me to slow down and to spend time with God, to pursue deep relationship with the very one who, for me as a pastor, was proclaiming to the world. And so my proclamation, my evangelism, my work, my discipleship was coming from a very empty cup. And I didn't even realize it. And I wasn't able to give out of anything. And so I was finding myself empty and approaching what some would call burnout. And so recognizing what do I need to do to find rhythm and space in my life. And the practice of Sabbath is a huge part of that, and particularly for my journey. And it is always interesting to me, the conversations I have around that and the pushback that almost automatically comes, like it's a bad thing, like it's wrong to slow down. And I'm also finding, again, when I think about for myself, what is the pushback? Like I'm getting defensive about someone talking about Sabbath because deep down I know that I don't have space, or that for me my defensiveness came from not feeling like I had the ability to slow down, and so to justify keeping my life at the pace that I had to do it, that there wasn't any other reason. And also we can swing. So I talked earlier about this experiencing kind of a legalism with Sabbath, and I think that is very real. And I think recognizing that there's a seasonality with Sabbath, that there's certain seasons of life that are different than others. These last several weeks, like I'm filming this right before I'm about to go travel for a funeral, that I was not planning, 2 weeks ago. It was not on my radar. That's how funerals work. But I'm singing and speaking in a funeral of someone who was very dear to me growing up in my home church, and was not planning. So this week is busy. It was a short week. It's stacked on top of last week when I was gone for my retreat. Another short week. So there's these times when our lives get more full and our days get longer. Yesterday I was at the church from 8 to 9 all day with meetings and ending with a board meeting. And those are just things that happen. And so there's a seasonality with life. There's seasons with family, parents with young kids. Life is different. Parents, like now with teenage kids who are very busy, life is different. So there's an ebb and flow. There's a reality that it's never always the same. You can't have this static rhythm. But we'll explore some of these things. But I overall just want to encourage us to embrace Sabbath, partly because of the resistance that it is against are the culture of this day. It's counterculture. And I think it's fun that it's coming on Palm Sunday. I'll talk a little bit about the counterculture nature of Jesus. We see that for sure in his ministry. It was kind of an upside down kingdom that we see and experience in the person of Jesus. And even his entrance to the city. And I've talked about this several years ago on Palm Sunday, where he comes in the East Gate, which is kind of opposite of where the leaders of that day, Pilate being one of them, would have entered the city, and they would have entered on this, big horse, entourage, army, all of these things. And Jesus comes in with a donkey and people waving palm branches. But there's still a declaration of king. So the way in which he came in and did things, he comes into the city, sees that it's late, and leaves for Bethany. There's no feast or celebration or coronation or a turning over of the other government that would have been before him, which would have been kind of the expected thing in that day. So Jesus and everything that he was about, his ministry, his life, was all counterculture. And what we see in that is turning things upside down, which is the same experience we get with the Sabbath, that it drives against the typical push of our culture for more, faster, better, more successful, striving, and it calls us to rest, a pattern that we see throughout Scripture. So we'll talk about those things, the connections with the overarching narrative of the story of God and what that means for us and what we do with that. So looking forward to it, and we'll see you Sunday.